I'm so excited to share my interview with Kim Folsom. She is a true pioneer. She founded 6 companies, sold 3 of them, raised over $30 million, has some really great advice about building value in businesses. I know you are going to be inspired by this video.
In the 80s, there wasn't really a path or, an ecosystem that supported diverse founders. And so finally, I had to do it the same way I did when undergrad as a, software engineer, that I said, I see the guys doing it. I'm just going to do it on my own. And finally, I did. So I started my first business in the mid 90s. Like any business, we go through various iterations to figure out, what you need to be to get it done. But, my goal for my businesses have always been, a big, a big, large strategy, because, prior to starting them, I worked for venture-backed or publicly traded companies that were, tech innovators. And so, that framework is what I utilize with going forward. So my first business, we were a Netflix platform to help physicians be able to get continuing education. But the crazy thing about it is it was doing it using a 56K modem. But, if you think about the number of millions of physicians, most of them have to get continuing ed, but most of them don't. Only 30% go to conferences. And so we partnered with a lot of the medical societies to be able to do that and provide that content VOD online. And so that was the first business that I grew to over 10 million in annual revenues, and sold it early 2000s. So that was my first exit. With my 7 businesses, I say 6, I raised over 30 million in venture. 98% of it was equity, some 2% was debt. But it was, an interesting, learning experience. All of them were, but, that was my first of 3 exits.
What did that feel like? Who did you sell to, and advice, things that you've learned as you've sold now?
Yeah.
Number of business.
First of all, when you raise venture money, which less than 1% of people of color do, and less than 5% of women-led CEO-led companies do, it's not this function of, oh, you just magically decide to exit. You have to really plan that as part of your overall strategy going in, because with equity funding, that's how you provide returns back to your investors, by going through an exit. And there's generally an expectation before they write a check of what size the business is going to be and what their return is going to be. And if there's not a clear understanding that there is going to be, 5, 10, even at the time in the crazy .com era, it could be even 100x return. If there wasn't a clear visibility of that happening, you aren't going to get that amount of capital. And that's the interesting thing, that, in 25 years, I still see people talking about they're growing these big businesses and they're going to raise money. And first of all, they don't really understand how to create the value in order to get the exits that they're seeking. And then I would say the second is, the other thing is, most people talk about it's just understanding about, why you're doing your business that you're going through and doing. Most folks, when they really look at their strategy and how realistic of what they think is going to happen in the exit, they would be, amazingly surprised that most of them don't compute. There's not a connecting of the dots. And this happens a lot of folks. Especially most founders, when they exit, especially if you raise money, and even if you do well, you may be, providing a return for your investors, but more often than not, you're not providing a return for yourself. In comparison to, especially if you're in a second or third tier city like San Diego, there's not enough people that coach people who've had exits about how to properly exit. So it's not such a significant disappointment for founders.
so much work to build this business and then to get a return for your investors. What did that feel like?
You know, you have a bit of accountability with regards to it, but it never ends the way you think it does. I mean, for us, we were significantly impacted with September 11th. Pre-September 11th, we had a variety of different offers. By the time I sold to the third offer I had as opposed to the first one. But it's more of a function of making certain, at the end of the day, what I wanted to do next and being able to think about that, in the front side. In fact, with the companies we've invested in now, one of the things we do have them go through is do the succession planning, because it's not so much what you feel, it's what you are being able to set yourself up to do as your next thing. And too often, most founders, when they exit, they don't have enough wherewithal to do more than maybe make a contribution to their 401k, as opposed to providing them with a platform that they can substantially have more control over what their next stack is going to be.
And take us along the timeline. What did you do next?
I still did not grasp, I guess, the magnitude of the uniqueness of what I did, but I recognized that I gained some experiences. So probably after that first company, I used my experiences to help other businesses, especially my business was a global business, but I went and helped more regional businesses with being able to be service-based businesses to become tech enablement and raise money. Because I realized after raising, at that time, I raised over 20 million with my first company with over 200 investors that, I figured it out so I can help other people figure it out. And my son was in early elementary school, so I wanted to take a break and have, a business that allowed me to, support him at least to get to middle school. And so I started a consulting practice to help businesses, adjust their strategy, raise some money. And I did that probably a few years. And then I went on to my next thing, which was, believe it or not, a Angie's List, but for commercial properties, which was the third business, I guess you could say I did.
To talk about the evolution of that business, and again, how did you exit?
So that one, I didn't actually end up exiting. I just decided to basically park that business. I got involved with it with another friend, and she had expertise in the commercial real estate market. I didn't. But I knew some elements of it, and her husband decided that he didn't want her to do a startup anymore and that she should go back to commercial real estate, which she ended up doing. And I ended up deciding, you know what, I don't have the same contacts and social capital that she does, so I'm gonna do something else. And so I ended up getting my broker's license in helping founders, be able to leverage their, commercial real estate for financing their business. So that was probably the fourth thing I did. So that was the fourth thing that I did. And from there, I ended up going to work for somebody else. Actually, after that, I still kept my brokerage practice and I still have them available to me, but I went to work for a company called DriveCam, and they were using, my first company leveraging video-based technology. They were using video-based technology in the commercial automotive space. And I was the general manager and vice president with that. And it was great because I realized some of the things I did with my past venture-backed company and how to apply it to, to the, current market. And so while running that company, my former venture capitalists, they raised a new fund and said, hey, with the change in dynamics with, kind of Web 2.0 and YouTube, I think was around then, and Google, and why don't you consider, launching another business? And so that, came about my fifth business, which was Show You How. And we were a enterprise retail platform to help manufacturers sell their products that cost over hundreds to thousands of dollars online. And so I raised about 10 million with that company. And we were once again an international company. And, and, the same kind of exercise of, planning of what you're going to do, at the start of, before you start. The interesting thing about that business versus my first business, I started my first business as a side hustle and adjusted my way to get to a strategy that was significant enough to raise capital. But by the time I raised capital from along the way with my first business, I was profitable. This business, because of my track record, I was able to get venture money right out of the gate. Although I did go through and get a proof of concept, my first customers, revenue. So I was, not a pre-revenue company by the time I raised, the institutional money. But, when you take a VC money at the start, they have a significant influence all the way through with what you do with regards to your team and your board and all those other things, which was quite different than what I went through with my first business. Interestingly enough, the recessions, with all 6 businesses, I've gone through 4 recessions. The recessions associated with that business was, I started with the Great Recession, and then we had the tsunami thing that happened in about 2011. Many of my clients were in Asia, and so they were significantly hit by that. But we were like one of the first 100 apps in the App Store on Apple. So, lots of interesting, innovation and milestones there, and ended up selling to a company in the Bay Area is what happened with that business. And, kind of the driver there was more from when our venture firm, where they were in their life cycle of their fund. And that's where, it was significantly different than my first company, where because I was profitable, I had more influence about, the stage valuation, all those other things. But because I took venture money right at the gate, it was just a whole completely different experience.
What was next, and how did that feel?
From there, we went through probably a few pivots in that area. And then from there went from show you how to real qualified, and basically still a video-based enterprise platform, but we built a really strong relationship with Salesforce. And Salesforce was actually our first customer with that business. It was an interesting, journey, but, that one I would say was probably my smallest exit of the 3 that I went through. We went through and showed that, you can use video to better qualify customers. And through that, I just came to realize that there is probably taking a step back as far as the opportunities. And I would say my investors, because by then I probably had some 225 investors going through all of those businesses, that they began when I did my first company all the way to here saying, Kim, there's still gaps in the market with regards to growing businesses. And at that time, we were at Web 3.0, and there was, Y Combinator and all of these things happening. But still, when you looked at, the number of diverse founder-led businesses or women-led businesses, they still, even today, there's a lot of things that help women start businesses, but not very many that get them beyond $25,000. And so, that was really the impetus and the kind of drumbeat that I was hearing from my investors about being able to solve that problem.
What are some of the things you learned either in negotiation, negotiating deals, or the process?
So I categorize my exits as, of 6 companies, 3 exits. It's like probably, as movies, 3 of them were dramas and 3 of them were comedies. And it's really understanding what's the value that drives, a good exit, and also, being able to consider what's going to be the next part of your story. This is, you asked what's going to be next. And too often people don't think about that. You know, I would say one thing it always is, it always takes 4 times as long and costs 3 times as much. And that the value is income streams. It's not just that you've got some whiz bang technology. It's being able to go through and say you have this number of hundreds of thousands of millions of users and the predictable income streams that go along with that. And the more that you have them, then the more that you have a likelihood of being able to, you know, have a positive exit, you know, from what you're doing. You know, and that's really the thing, you know, as I'm talking to a lot of the people who've gone through our programs, you know, they'll say, oh, well, you know, I've built this thing. And it's like, and so what do you think is going to happen? You know, it's like, I built this thing and, you know, someone's going to acquire it. And it's like, acquire it for what? What value have you created? Because that's really the thing that's most important, is you can look at the, you know, income streams and predictability of those income streams and the multiples of those income streams, and the ability for those income streams to happen without you being with your finger on the pulse. That's really what is going to drive that. And without, you know, making certain that your economic model is right, then what you're going to end up selling for is going to be some percentage of your profits, which is not very substantial. And most people don't understand that, because one, most of the people that are, you know, they're working to help them with haven't gone through it. But I'll tell you, that's generally what happens. And, so having and adjusting your model such that you have the predictable recurring streams, you know, contractual things in place. And some people may think, oh, well, gosh, I don't want to get into the heavy issues with business of making certain I have contracts in place, making certain I have recurring revenue, or, multiple revenue streams. Then you must be comfortable, that meaning you're going to be struggling for a long time. Because at the end of the day, either you're going to have influence over what you're going to do with how you're going to improve your quality of life, or somebody else is going to have influence over it. One of the two. But I would say that it really comes down to the predictable income streams that you can generate, that's going to provide the value so that you can have a good exit. So I think that, that don't be afraid to ask for help, because generally you want people who've done what you want to do, and that they've done what you want to do. And it's not just that they have a lot of hype associated with what they're doing, but they've really gone through and made the mistakes. And it's not just the successes that they've had, it's also, the mistakes that they've had, because, that's when you look at the other ecosystems, be it on the East Coast or West Coast, those are the ecosystems that are generating much more successful entrepreneurs.
Well, hopefully we can change that in San Diego with the work you're doing and some of the other awesome organizations. Well, Kim, I want to thank you so much for your time. It's been, of course, inspiring, and I've known you for quite some time, but didn't know some of the details along the way. So really, really appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I wish you continued success with your venture.